All right.
Cool.
Awesome. Okay, so welcome, Jim. So this is my guest today is an old buddy of mine named Jim Goddard, and Jim is kindly calling in from outside of Tokyo, right?
Yep, Kanagawa.
Okay, so that's about an hour or something like that outside of central Tokyo.
Train, yep.
But Jim and I met, I'm not going to give dates because it will age us both tremendously, but we met many, many, many years ago in San Diego behind a cafe called Zanzibar, believe it or not. Remember that? In any case, we got to be friends, and we stayed friends all these years, even though since then we've been on completely different parts of the globe, and occasionally I'll pass through Tokyo and we'll get together and catch up, which is great. And occasionally we've done that in Osaka many years ago as well.
Yeah. And
Jim does quite a few things. Like if you teach, is it a high school or a university? Where you teach at a university, and Jim also has run a scuba instruction school, right? And sort of an excursion, a weekend excursion dive adventure school. But besides being a great friend all these years, Jim's been somebody that I've always admired and looked up to because he has some just amazing abilities. And so I thought it'd be fantastic to talk to him and discuss a few of those things today.
Cool.
And I'm going to start with a story to give a little context.
I tell you what, before you tell your story, if I can, let me just say one thing about you, about Rob, just so maybe for your listeners too, people that are listening in. So one thing that I've always thought about Rob that I think of there's this woman who I grew up with. She was actually my babysitter. She's an artist. And I remember one time she asked me to sit for her group. She was instructing other artists. They were doing pastels or watercolors, and sort of like a handful of them. And they sat down, and I think I sat for like 3 days, like a couple hours a day over a period. And at the end, they all showed me their pictures, and they asked me, "Hey, Jim, what do you think?" And I looked at all of them, and looking at them, I could see, well, they all look somewhat like me, for sure. Like there are definite elements. I'm like, those are all accurate. But the maid artist, the woman who was instructing, hers was the only one I liked. And it was like a vision of me, how I saw myself, like the best part of me that I saw, right? Like when I look in the mirror, and everyone else's picture were like accurate, but oh man, look, there's my acne scarring is really easy to see here. Oh wow, she really caught the crookedness of my nose, and I've always hated that, right? But that's true. And one thing I've always admired about you, Rob, is that I think you reflect and you show and you articulate the version of people that they want to be, the best version, probably how they see themselves or how they could see themselves. And that's one thing I've always admired about you. So I thought I'd put that out there.
Thanks. And that's good to hear. So here's part of how I see or have experienced Jim over the years. And if anybody who's listening to this has taken NLP class with me, they may have heard this story because it's one of my favorite stories to share there. So in any case, Jim was living in San Diego, and at a certain point we connected, and he said, "I'm out of here." He said, "I'm leaving." And I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Well, I'm going to travel around the world and travel around Asia." And I said, "Well, why would you want to do that?" But I think you said basically you wanted to explore, but there was this thing that I know you wrote about a little bit around the time about searching for enlightenment in a way, or searching for wisdom. And so Jim left, and I moved back to New York, and we stayed in touch for a while. And then eventually Jim settled down in Japan, and sort of fell in love with Japan, and stayed there. And quite a few years later, I can't remember how many years later, I went to Japan, and Jim and I ended up going to one of these, here there's a place called Spa Castle, and it's like this huge shopping mall of saunas and hot tubs, and it's amazing. Spa World, is that what it was called?
Spa World, yeah. Still there, still very successful.
So we were sitting, I believe, in a Swedish sauna, and kind of stretching out there. And I said, Jim, all those years ago, you said you were going to travel around Asia, and that you were, pursuing enlightenment. And I said, how did it turn out? Because I had never we hadn't circled back, and I hadn't heard the end of the story. And Jim, in his Jim way, said, well, it was interesting. He said, I went all over Asia, and I was looking for, I talked to great teachers. You met the Dalai Lama, right? Or you shook his hand.
Yeah.
And then Jim has always been an amazing martial artist, and I don't say that lightly. And Jim shared that he had checked out as many teachers as he possibly could in Japan, right? Swords and all these different arts. And then he turned to me and he said, I realized that what I was really doing is I was looking for Mr. Miyagi. And, for those of you who don't know, Mr. Miyagi is like this wise karate teacher from the Karate Kid. And he's amazing. Everything he says is sort of cryptic, but amazing. And so I said to Jim, I said, all right, so how did it go? Did you find him? And Jim said, well, unfortunately, no. You said that you looked high and low everywhere. And after a while, you realized that there was no Mr. Miyagi. There was no such thing as Mr. Miyagi. And I said, well, what happened next? And you said that actually you got very depressed for a while. And for a while, you were down because you'd been searching for this thing for years and really excited to find it. And then to realize that it's a myth, that there's no Mr. Miyagi, is a real letdown, and you sort of you get crushed. Your spirit gets crushed. And so I said, well, what happened next? Jim said that, well, a little while later, a number of months later, I noticed that I started feeling a little bit better. And I said, well, what happened? And you said that you weren't sure at first what was happening, but then you looked around and you realized, you're right, there's no such thing as Mr. Miyagi. But at least in Japan, he realized that there were little bits of Mr. Miyagi all over the place. And then it might be the person who's cooking your ramen. There was something in the way they did it that just had a little bit of Mr. Miyagi, or the person at the newsstand, or the person collecting your tickets at the movie theater, that there was little bits of Mr. Miyagi to learn from all over the place. And then after that, he said, I felt a lot better. So
yeah.
That was that story. So why don't we use that to as a kickoff point?
Point, yeah, good one. Yeah. So one of the things I did here, and I don't remember how. And by the way, where we were in Spa World, we were in the German Black Forest, I think. Weren't we on lounge chairs? And we were looking up, right? Because they had those fake trees like going up into the ceiling. Actually, it was pretty amazing. Oh, pardon me. Yeah, and so it was, so it was in the Black Forest, and so I began studying in a sword dojo. Actually, was what I was doing, and because I'd always wanted two things I always wanted to study. One was the sword, and one was Kyudo, right, the longbow, which I never did. Pardon me. And so at the sword dojo, it was an amazing experience, and it was one of the places that I did not find Mr. Miyagi. But but places that I did, like unsuspecting places, like my father-in-law, right? Actually, so this is a fascinating story. So he belonged to a dojo. Well, he belonged to a Go dojo.
Oh, wow.
Right, the game of
Go,
Go.
it's almost like chess, but
Yeah,
or
and that
Othello.
was a very serious thing. Yeah, and then he also belonged to another like dojo of singing, Shigin. You should check this out, man. You would really dig it. It's a very guttural, almost reminds me of a Russian type of singing I had heard before, and it's very guttural. It's very like, oh, I don't know. It just comes from the Jungian abyss, man. It just comes from there, and very centered. Tea ceremony. People I knew who did tea ceremony. Extremely centered, incredible people. People's flower arrangements, just in their house, not like, they're doing exhibitions all over the world, in their house, in their garden, these little tiny gardens where, the people's lawns here are maybe 1 meter by 3 meters. And, the care and the discipline and the attention of detail that's put in that small amount. It's just amazing. So like you said, I saw it all over. Like you mentioned, like the magazine stand, a train conductor. No, not even a train conductor. Sorry, the guy who's packing
with the voice.
On the stage,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
The deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
that guy.
Well, I was just gonna say, I watched that movie a couple of years ago, Jiro Dreams of Sushi. I don't know if you ever saw the movie. It's about this guy named Jiro who's got this little 10-seat, supposedly the best sushi in Japan, Michelin rated, and that guy he's a master, and you can really see it in the way he approaches everything. He may not be the nicest guy in the world, but it's amazing. When I saw that, I was like, oh, that's what a martial artist is. Even though it's not a martial art,
yes,
there's something really amazing about it.
Yes. And you know what, for me, that's perfect, Rob. So for me, and I'd always thought this, but I never lived anywhere where I could experience it. But what I learned was, so the whole goal, and honestly, I'm not so bullish on the whole idea of martial arts these days, honestly, because I've kind of, from the fighting angle, and like why people join and like why I originally began, I've got some issues with that. But, living in a place where people are living what the original goals were, right? So, that very full goal, that life system goal of living a discipline, making yourself your best self, putting attention into what you do, being centered in what you do. That's what I see here, right? And as an example, you had mentioned the packing the sushi train, was it? Did you say? Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So, what's it called? Sorry.
No. I was talking about the sushi guy, but I know what you're talking about. The guys
gotcha.
in Tokyo Station who are jamming you on the car in the morning.
Yeah. Well, it made me think of sushi train because packed like sushi on the train. But so like one thing that I thought of is these folks, what probably it's not such a prestigious job, right? We would think. And yet this guy or girl is wearing this perfect uniform, right? It's clean, it's pressed, it's just so, and they're carrying themselves with perfect dignity. They're carrying out their job to the perfect amount of attention, is putting their whole self into what we might consider not such an important job in life, right? Compared to, he's not an executive, or he's not a banker, or he doesn't own a business or something. And I think that act of commitment and putting yourself into something, there's something for me to learn there for sure.
That's definitely something that I've seen in Japan again and again. I remember there was a 7-Eleven that was on a moderately busy street, but you could park at the 7-Eleven. And so there was an older gentleman there with the little traffic things that would guide people out into the street so that they could drive out. And boy, that guy really took his job seriously. And that's the beauty. It's not, it's not like the job. And not only does the person take the job seriously, but the people around them take it seriously.
Yeah.
Because there's a respect about a job well done.
Yeah.
And I do want to say, as we're talking, what occurs to me is, I don't think that those things are only happening in Japan. I think they happen all over the world. I think for me, I noticed them in Japan in stark contrast. Like if you go to Starbucks in Tokyo or anywhere in Japan, compared to Starbucks here or McDonald's, you feel like you're in a fine restaurant. I mean, the service is impeccable.
Yeah.
Now you get that here, but I think it's easy to miss. It's easy to miss when you encounter somebody who's just really dialed in, beautifully what they do and elevated it to another level.
I tell you what, what this you're reminding me of is so my wise sage grandpa. I remember him. They gave me this car when I was a university student, and it was a car that was hit and totaled by like the body panels on one side. And it was this hideous robin's egg blue. It was my grandmother's favorite color, but my grandfather was, making that happen for my grandmother. And so they bought it back from the bank, after some other car hit it on the street for like maybe a couple $100. And they say, "Hey, Jim, here you go. This can be your first car, for university." And, naturally, I wasn't so proud of that car, but I remember, my grandfather, coming over one day and looked at the car and said, "Jim, you're not keeping the car so clean, inside or out. What's going on?" And I said, "Oh, Grandpa, when I get a better car, I'm going to keep that one clean. This one is just not such a nice car. So, it would be like polishing a," I didn't say this, but in my mind, I'm thinking, it would be like polishing a pig, right? And he looked at me and he said something, bam, it just stuck there. And he said, "Jim, how you clean this car is how you will clean every car." And bam, right in the forehead. Yeah. And it was true. I still don't clean my cars, right? And so what I see is like here, these folks, they're doing every job the same way, with the same attention, the same seriousness. And man, I want to be there. And it's a great example to live in.
And it's something, it's nice to have it all around you, because it is something that if you're open to it, you can learn from, if that's what you want to learn from. And I think what you experienced when you didn't find Mr. Miyagi is something that I think anybody on their journey will encounter at some point, which is that you find teachers that are great in a segment. Like nobody seems to have the whole picture, but they may have pieces that are great. And it's tough, because it is tough to find somebody who's sort of like, we expect these teachers to be great martial artists, to be great in relationships, to be great teachers, to be great in communicating. And very often it's just not the case. They may be great as a teacher and they might be horrible in relationships or something like that.
Yeah. The other thing that this reminds me of, and it's kind of martial in a way, but so as you know, there's very little crime here, right?
Like,
I think that's been your experience, right?
Yep.
People don't generally, fear things. However, somehow there's this great awareness of crime prevention. So, for example, my mother-in-law, sending my wife when my wife would go to Osaka, the big city, because they lived out in the farm country, rice country, and she would send her in, and out there they would have zero crime their whole life, and yet they would say, oh yeah, when you go to Osaka, you really have to, watch the basket of your bicycle, you have to cover it, and you have to hold your handbag tight, and don't put valuables here in your bag, you want to protect it here. And apartments, when you go shopping for an apartment, the first floor is less expensive. And I asked, well, why is that? Oh, robbers. And I said, oh, does that happen here a lot? Oh yeah, never.
Right.
So I'm like, and so what got in my head, and I still don't know, is how does someone or a culture remain perpetually vigilant and prepared for something that virtually never happens?
That's a great question, and I think there are areas.
You stop.
I think there is that awareness, but I've seen things in Tokyo, for example. Somebody will be in a cafe, and they'll put their cell phone with their wallet on top of it. They're sitting at a table by themselves. They'll put that on their table, and they'll get up and go to the bathroom, and they'll leave their cell phone and their wallet on the table in the middle of, it's like the middle of Manhattan. And there's a confidence that it'll be there when they get back. And I think probably until 5 or more years ago, that was the case, that by and large, you could leave something and it would still be there. And I think that type of thing happens just because the idea that something can be taken is like such an anomaly. But that is a funny thing about, or an amazing thing about Japan, is if you lose your wallet on the train, that wallet is going to be in one of two places. It's going to be exactly where you left it, or it's going to be in the station master's place, and they're going to have it all put in little baggies with like your IDs in one, your credit cards another, your pocket change in another, and it'll be waiting for you.
Yep, I had my wallet returned to me once in Osaka, years back, exactly like that, and nothing taken.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing. I wanted to talk about a couple other topics as well, so we can dovetail into those, because one of the things, and I mentioned this to you when we spoke yesterday, I think one of the things that I've been intrigued with in your work is your ability to set up these activities that invite people to learn or invite people out of their comfort zone. And so I thought it would be, since we're talking about mentors and teachers, I thought it would be interesting to talk about that and how you go about that.
Sure thing.
And do you remember the story I mentioned about the books and the talk? You want to share that? Because that was one of my favorite examples.
Yeah. Well, first, I've got to preface this by saying that, Rob, you coming to my that one university in Tokyo, I mean, that set up, I don't know what fortune that happened. I don't know if you remember this, right? So Rob is riding the train. Was it?
Yeah.
Well, but maybe this one time you remember. So Rob is riding the train in. He was going to meet me. I was going to have him like, hey, Rob, you want to sit in a university class? I mean, it's a whole different slice of culture. I think you'll really definitely get something out of it. And it was a really good group as well. So Rob is riding the train from Tokyo to this campus. I mean, on a through millions of people, and he's on the train. Do you remember this? You talked.
Yeah. Well, what I remember, I'll say my side of the story, and I wasn't going to use this example, but this is a great example of what I'm talking about. What Jim does. I asked Jim, all right, I would love to come meet you. Can you give me directions exactly? What's the station? What's the name of the university? Where can I meet you on the campus? And Jim said, just get on the train and pick somebody out that you think looks interesting and ask them. And I said, that will never work. And he was like, goodbye. And he pretty much hung up the phone. So I got on the train and I was riding, and I'm trying to read the signs, which I don't think even had the English version.
Yeah.
And I'm counting stops and everything. And these two young ladies started looking over in my direction, and I think they could sense that I was a little bit freaked out. And I looked at them, and they sort of said, what's going on? And I said, do you know where this stop is? And they said, oh yeah, we'll tell you. And so they started keeping an eye on me. And then a little while later, they gestured that was the stop, and they got out too. And we started walking, and then they could tell that I was still looking around. They said, where are you going? And I said, well, I'm going to this university. And they said, oh, great, that's where we're going as well. So they started walking with me, and then they said, what are you doing there? And I said, well, I'm going to visit the class of my friend. And they said, well, who's your friend? I said, it's this guy, Jim Goddard. And they said, Jimmy? And they said, Jimmy, he's our favorite teacher.
Unbelievable, man.
So they said, they basically grabbed me and they said, we will take you to him. And they brought me to you. You were outside, and they brought me and hand delivered me to you. So that was a great example.
What are the chances of that, though?
I think
it's
you
the simulation.
It's the
simulation.
Yeah,
it's the simulation winking at us, man.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's the setup. And so Rob experienced, what I appreciate experiencing, right? When someone is going to teach me a valuable lesson, right? So I want to have my essential elements, right? Is that somehow the construct, what I believe in, what I think is true, how I usually do things, that has to be destroyed either at the beginning of the activity or somewhere during the activity. If it's working, I'm gonna realize,
it has to be
man,
destroyed. Did you say?
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah. The construct, right? My belief of how I would normally go about a task. So the tools that I would normally bring to this task, I'd have to realize, oh man, these tools aren't working. What am I going to do? So that's what I appreciate, right? If something's coming at me, right? And so that's for me is an ideal construct, right? Because so probably, and you're coming to the university, right? Kind of like me, right? I'd want to research the heck out of it and, be all prepared. And so, but I knew from my experience, right? It's great talking to people, and it's a good way to meet people on the trains, and people are so eager to help you here, really. So I knew that would be a good experience for you.
It's interesting because, you're saying that in setting up this activity, you're setting up in such a way that the person's construct, their tools, their scaffolding that they're holding on to needs to be destroyed. And it's interesting, David Gordon, who I've talked to you about a lot, who is just a phenomenal NLP trainer, and one of his real points of expertise is in telling therapeutic metaphors. And one of the things he says is, in the setup of this metaphor, he said there has to be a crisis. And he says, like, you got to burn the boats, and you got to tear the whole thing to the ground so that the person who's listening has an opportunity to experience the thing that they've been unwilling to experience.
Yeah. And Rob, what this reminds me of? Last night when we were talking, I was kind of thinking about this, and there's another video that I plan on doing it, and it's kind of centered around the concept of hitting rock bottom. And so I see this as a mini rock bottom in a lesson.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, nothing that I brought to this gunfight is working, right? I brought a knife to this gunfight, right?
So do you
holy
remember,
cow, I've got to.
Do you remember the story where I'll start it, and I would love if you remember it, if you finish it. But you said you had a class. I don't know if it was just men or women, and their assignment was they were going to have to read something and give a little 1-minute talk, right?
Yeah.
And you felt that none of these people ever talked or communicated with each other or with you or anybody. So what did you do there?
Yeah. Yeah, so the group, I remember this, thank you. It was a group of science kids in the science department, and typically my experience is a lot of these kids can almost be like on the spectrum, and maybe be a little bit Asperger. You know, they're brilliant beyond brilliance, right? And but you know, their communication really needs to be juxed, and they're also, so I find that science kids are often very respectful of the hierarchy, you know, in terms of this is sensei and there's a certain way I need to, and if sensei tells me something, man, that's got to be true, right? So there was a little construct I wanted to destroy with this activity. So what I did is I can't remember where I got them, but I had some well, anyway, some books. I won't say what they are, but I had some special books, and I gave them to them out to groups. They're in groups of 5 or 6, and I said, all right, I want you guys to, you know, have a look at these books. I'm going to give you a set time. Maybe it was 15 minutes. You know, make a synopsis of what you think this book is about or why it's significant, and then I'm going to have each of you speak for about a minute on that topic. Everybody good? Okay, go. And so, you know, they sit down seriously for this 15-minute thinking period, and they're opening these books, and they're kind of looking at each other and kind of uncomfortable in their chairs, and, you know, but still silence, you know, nothing. And you know, finally, I can't remember who.
And didn't you tell them that they can't talk? I thought you told them no talking.
Yeah. So they couldn't even check, pardon me, your memory's better than mine. So they couldn't even get a meaning check from a partner, like, hey, what's going on here, right? And finally, one of them really uncomfortably kind of challenge the authority in his mind, right? And he asked me, he said, Sensei, there are no words in these books, right? What are we doing here? And it turns out they were Braille books. And that was a segue actually into another activity they were going to do. We were going to be making our own Braille, and they were going to be like testing the sensitivity of different fingers, like how close could they actually sense 2 Braille bumps with different fingers, right? And left hand, right hand, different fingers. And so it was kind of a segue into another thing. So I was trying to, you know, smash a couple of their concepts there, but one of them was, you know, be suspicious of me because I might, you know, don't always trust, you know, because I was always trying to mess with their construct there a little bit.
And was that something that you experienced growing up favorably, or where did that come from? Like, how did you learn that was a good way to structure a lesson?
Wow, good point. I had some really good teachers early on. 3rd grade, Mr. Bauer. Mr. Bauer, how you doing? He's still out there on Facebook. You know, I had some others along the way. And so actually for me, elementary school was a really tough time, because I don't know, Rob, what was wrong. If I was like a little, I don't know. I was a problem learner, right? So when I was around 3rd, 4th grade, I remember one day I got put into a special reading class that had 3 students in it. And I looked around, looked to my left, I looked to my right. I said, oh, this can't be good. This is something, you know, I know I'm not in the super advanced class. So so I was put like in these special low, like helper classes. And then, you know, I was having, I think I was, I don't know, partially autistic or something, like words I saw in pictures instead of verbal. Like when I hear autistic people speaking about how they experience language, that's how it was for me. And so up until like 3rd grade, I had like a picture that went with every word. And then at some point I reached this crisis because my mind didn't have enough memory space to store all the pictures, and that's when things kind of got awry, and I had real academic trouble. And then everything came full circle, and by 6th grade, everyone thought, "Oh my God, wow, yeah." So, but it was some really tough years there, and I really respected the teachers that stuck it out with me and saw, hey, maybe you're not thinking like other people think, but we can make it work. So that made an impression on me.
Very interesting. And it must have been amazing just to have teachers who had the patience to sort of stick it out, right? I mean, that's a real gift. And I see that in the way that you interact with people. It's like you at least from the outside, I don't know, I'm not around you that often, but it seems like you have this patience for people, and you kind of have a thing about different types of people being able to interact, and like, oh, we can all get along, we can have fun, we can do things together. Any other
before we go off of that? So there was, and this one teacher, I think her name was Mrs. Schwartz, actually, and
what was her name?
It was a real Mrs. Schwartz, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And I think it was around 6th grade. I was in the lowest like science and math class, and she had a look at me, and she was thinking, and what I remember was I felt like I was caught in the cogs of this educational system, and I was kind of labeled as a certain thing, and I kind of had a sense, especially with science, I kind of had a sense that, well, I think I'm a little above this, right? Because anyway, I was stuck in this little cog, and she kind of reached down to that and say, hey, you know what, I really want to try and give you a chance, because I think that you could challenge yourself, you could be up. And she she put me into the highest classes, and I thrived. But who knows what the history would have been.
Wow.
After, if that hadn't happened, certainly would be a different path, not necessarily a lesser one, but a different one for sure.
Great. And I think that's interesting, because I think obviously she saw something, and saw enough that she thought it was worth, let's put him in this other context. And it sounds like you thrived from the challenge.
I was lucky, man.
Right?
I was lucky. Yeah.
Well, and maybe, lucky, or maybe you enjoyed the challenge a bit, it seems like.
Oh, totally. Yeah, totally.
So, maybe that's a key piece in developing these activities for learning, is that you see a potential in somebody. You see that, okay, this person can get from the train to the class and meet me. or these
right,
or these students can confront the teacher in a way that they didn't think was possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rob, I tell you, it's a hard thing to do. It takes a lot of energy, and depletes an educator or a task designer's creative energy. But I think that ultimately, when I look at times in my training or education career when I've not been at the top of my game, learners were bored. Right? I mean, we've all been there, right? If you're not, I think, most of us, I think, at our core want to be challenged. And I think there's a fantasy, like you and I were talking about yesterday, maybe, that I think superficially we think that we just want to relax, like enlightenment. Oh, I can stop trying.
Right. I'm done.
But anyone who's had a week in the office where there's nothing to do, pretty knows how miserable that is, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the fantasy is we got nothing, but the reality. So I think that at our core, we like to be challenged, and the real challenge for educators and trainers of any kind, is to have the energy to always be looking for that thing that's going to put someone off balance, maybe put a little artificial rock bottom, and make a person just throw up their toolkit and say, dang, you know, how am I going to get through this? So that's, yeah, that's the goal.
I like that idea. Let's trash this toolkit.
Yeah.
Well, we had a third topic, which we were going to toy with, but we don't have time for that. But maybe that's a reason to do a part two. And that was that idea of goals versus systems. So I'll sort of leave that as a teaser for next time.
Cool.
But very good. Any last thoughts or anything else that you'd like to add before we sign off officially?
No, thanks for doing this, man. It's a great forum. It's a great idea. I wish you all the best of luck. And I know that, like I said, you know, your strength of being able to see the best that someone can be, that's been a real powerful and influential tool for me. I know that you could make that a tool for other folks as well. So thanks for doing this.
Great. Well, thanks for being on here. And I will put in the notes a couple places where you can find Jim, so you can find out more about him. He makes some awesome videos also, so you will see him in those. All right. Thanks.
Cool. Cheers.
All right. Take care.